Good afternoon. In a democratic society, abuses of power and authority can and should be freely called out without fear of retribution. Social media has rapidly become the key platform for this purpose, from cell phone videos of interactions with police to social media posts by survivors of sexual assault and harassment leading to the Me Too movement. La réglementation des médias sociaux nuit directement à notre capacité d'exercer cette liberté d'expression à la fois démocratique et essentielle. Social media is how this generation is telling their story, building communities of support, and engaging in democracy. But in the midst of a pandemic, while Canadians are stuck at home and relying on social media for information, connectivity, and entertainment more than ever before, the Liberal government quietly moved to radically change how Canadians can use social media. Les défenseurs d'Internet, les avocats des libertés civiles et les universitaires ont souligné les problèmes qui représentent les changements de dernière minute apportés par les libéraux au projet de loi C10. Les conservateurs ont demandé que des mesures soient prises immédiatement. And while I'm glad the Liberals have listened to our demands for a charter review to changes they made to C10, the Trudeau government's move raises a fundamental question. What kind of society do we want to live in? Is it a society where our connectivity through social media leads to greater transparency and accountability? Or are Canadians prepared to have their opinions moderated by the CRTC? Le projet de loi C10 des libéraux nous amène sur une pente très glissante. Le simple fait de savoir qu'une telle réglementation pourrait exister représente une menace à la liberté d'expression des Canadiens. Bill C-10 leaves the door open for an abuse of power and infringement on the rights of Canadians. It will radically change the way Canadians use the Internet. Canada's Conservatives are working hard to stop it and will oppose this bill vigorously. But let me be perfectly clear. If this bill passes, a Conservative government will repeal it. Conservatives support leveling the playing field between the large foreign streaming services and Canadian broadcasters. I've made this point clear for well over a year. Au lieu de donner un mandat clair au CRTC pour assurer une équité dans le secteur de la radiodiffusion, les libéraux ont présenté un projet de loi incohérent qui accorde des pouvoirs immenses et vagues au CRTC. Ce transfert massif des pouvoirs au CRTC, dont personne ne connaît encore l'ampleur, va à l'encontre de ce que le Québec veut, c'est-à-dire plus de pouvoir en culture. C'est important de parler de la spécificité du Québec et des francophones. Nous avons toujours été clairs à l'effet qu'un gouvernement conservateur va travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec pour accroître l'autonomie dont celui-ci dispose en matière de culture. Le projet de loi C10 fait exactement le contraire en donnant plus de pouvoir à Ottawa. C'est d'ailleurs un gouvernement conservateur qui a accordé une place permanente pour le Québec à l'UNESCO, pour que sa spécificité rayonne davantage à l'international. Les conservateurs vont toujours agir pour nos créateurs. Un gouvernement conservateur va présenter un projet de loi pour obliger les services de diffusion continue étrangers de dépenser une part importante de leurs revenus pour produire du contenu original canadien, en français et en anglais. Nous allons aussi réduire les frais et les formalités administratives pour permettre aux radiodiffuseurs canadiens d'être plus compétitifs. Conservatives support championing Canadian arts and culture and doing more to help our artists, our musicians, writers, and creators to share Canadian stories, art, movies, and songs with the world. Canadian artists have always punched above their weight on the world stage, and Canadians are proud of our arts and culture community. Le milieu canadien des arts et de la culture mérite d'être défendu à Ottawa.
C'est ce que je veux faire, mais non pas au détriment des droits fondamentaux et de la liberté d'expression des Canadiens. Prime Minister Trudeau, withdraw this terribly flawed bill that your own minister cannot even explain. It is unfair to trample on the rights of Canadians, to try and mislead them by saying they must accept regulation of their social media in order to help artists. That is not only disingenuous, but the deceit shows why they tried to sneak in this change. The NDP and the Bloc Québécois might make political deals and look the other way on freedom of expression, but Conservatives will not. And if Mr. Trudeau will not withdraw this bill, I'm telling Canadians I will scrap it when I form government. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
And now we'll be taking questions, starting with question on the phone and alternate between the room and the phone to sanitize the mic between questions. Quick reminder, as usual, one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions en commençant par les questions au téléphone et alternant entre les questions de la salle et au téléphone pour bien désinfecter le micro entre les questions. Petit rappel, une question avec une question de suivi. Today, Mr. O'Toole will take 8 questions. Aujourd'hui, M. O'Toole prendra 8 questions. Operator, do we have the first question?
From Ryan Tumulty at National Post.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. Wanted to get your response to the Ethics Commissioner's finding in the Wee case as it relates to Prime Minister Trudeau and former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. I see in your release that you see issues here. I'm wondering if you think the Ethics Commissioner reached the wrong decision or if you think the laws that he is working under are deeply flawed.
This report was entitled Trudeau 3. Our Prime Minister has been under investigation 3 times, his Finance Minister, former Finance Minister several times, and he left just before a guilty finding. The system is broken. There are gaps in lobbying and there's special access for people close to the Prime Minister, and that has to stop. Canadians are tired of it, so we need a new set of laws to fight this corruption, this entitlement that exists with this government. The second pillar of my Canada Recovery Plan will do just that, with a new accountability law that will be the toughest in our history to show Canadians that they can have their faith restored in our federal institutions. So the system is broken. Canadians deserve better.
Can you give us an example, I guess, of where you think the law prevented the Ethics Commissioner today from finding Prime Minister Trudeau was in breach and how you would change the law in this instance?
Prime Minister Trudeau himself said he was in a conflict of interest in the Wee scandal, a perception of conflict of interest. His family was paid, family members were paid $500,000, and he was involved in a decision of a non-tendered contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars to those people who paid his family. They didn't register to lobby, and they were talking directly to their good friends in Trudeau's cabinet. That shows a disdain for everyday people that were hanging on by a thread during the pandemic, small business owners trying to make ends meet, and the special access of Liberal insiders was in full swing and operation. That is what, in this joint set of findings, the Ethics Commissioner did find.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. Teresa Wright from the Canadian Press. You got the AstraZeneca vaccine. How do you feel about that now, and do you plan to get a second dose?
Every vaccine that's been approved by Health Canada is effective for use and safe. And I was proud to get mine and will get the second dose when my time comes. The challenge for Canada is we needed doses several months ago, Teresa. This is why we're in a third wave, and we don't have sufficient supplies. The Prime Minister, his Health Minister, Health Canada, NACI, there's been confused messaging for weeks. Canadians are already stressed, already nervous, already uncertain. They have made it worse, and Canadians deserve better. So I will be getting that second dose. We should have shorter dosing periods. But I want Canadians to know that I trust what is approved by Health Canada, and I really wish we had a supply that would have avoided the third wave.
Just as a follow-up, how do you feel about everything that's happened with the AstraZeneca vaccine in recent days and weeks?
I've said for a year, the key tools in a pandemic are vaccines, rapid testing and screening, and information. Mr. Trudeau has failed on all three for over a year. We're months behind other countries in full and effective vaccine rollouts. There still isn't a national standard for screening and deployment on massive quantities to allow us to reopen on a swift and safe timeline. And the information, whether on the border, whether on mask usage, whether on vaccines and how to take them, dosing periods, has been a disaster. And it's fueling a frustration that Canadians have. We see the US, we see the UK opening, we see more hope, we see economies returning, and we're going the opposite way. Canadians deserve better, and the Conservatives, our recovery plan is our plan to get this country moving, to make sure we lead in the economic recovery after COVID.
Modérateur, prochaine question. On peut return next question.
From Rachel Gilmore at Global News.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Your party tweeted a meme last night that compared a two-dose summer to a Trudeau summer, with one showing a party and the other one showing a man seemingly on oxygen in a hospital bed. I was wondering, did you approve that tweet, and have you been informed why it was taken down?
Thank you, Rachel. I think all Canadians are frustrated that we're in this third wave. We're in more lockdowns as our friends in the United States are opening up. There's fear and lack of information, as I was just saying. But that post detracted from the serious discussion that we need to have to fill the gap from vaccines, to have a plan to safely and effectively reopen. And that's why it was removed. We're going to continue to hold Mr. Trudeau to account for those shortcomings on vaccine deployment, on the fact that we're in the severe third wave as a result of his slow and negligent response. But we have to engage in a way that's serious.
On a totally different note, I also wanted to ask about your reaction to the Ethics Commissioner report. In particular, I'm curious about what you think about Mario Dionne's finding that Trudeau didn't break ethic rules, despite Trudeau having previously said himself that he made a mistake in not recusing himself from the discussion.
Mr. Trudeau did admit in the WE scandal he had a perceived conflict of interest. He broke the public trust. He said that himself. He's been found guilty twice previously of violating federal ethics rules as Prime Minister. Multiple ministers also found, the finance minister, former found guilty today, who's already left office. Canadians are tired. Canadians are frustrated by the culture of entitlement and corruption that surrounds the Trudeau government in a way that reminds everyone of the SNC Lavalin, the private holiday scandal. Canadians deserve better. The system, I believe, is broken when the Prime Minister doesn't learn the lessons from Trudeau 1, the first finding against him. You can see from Trudeau 3, he still hasn't learned the lessons, and that's why we have an anti-corruption plan, an accountability plan to win back that public trust in our politicians.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Mr. O'Toole, Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Can you enlighten us on what that plan is? You say the system's broken. How would you fix it?
Well, let's look at this third Trudeau scandal itself, Kevin. The key figures in the We Charity scandal admitted they did not register as lobbyists. They were having direct conversations about a massive $500 million program with figures in the Trudeau government that were being employed, that were receiving benefits. They knew that Mr. Trudeau's family had been paid by them to the tune of $500,000, and there was holes in lobbying. There is now a definition of family and friends, and how Mr. Trudeau can include friends in one discussion, in one defense, and not another. We need to close the loopholes, Kevin, and we need to send a signal that the Prime Minister should lead by example with ethical and moral clarity, not constantly be under investigation, be misrepresenting facts to Canadians. I think Canadians deserve better, and that's what we should take from the Trudeau 3 report.
My follow-up, I actually want to turn to Alberta. Premier Jason Kenney, who also backed your bid for Conservative leader, is facing some in-party fighting. An MLA overnight quit as chair of the caucus and went as far as to say that Premier Kenney should resign, in part because he's failed to stand up to Ottawa and he's had mixed messaging when it comes to his plan against COVID. What are your thoughts on Premier Kenney? Has he been a good Conservative premier, or should he step down?
Premier Kenney, like all of our premiers, have been doing yeoman service in the absence of leadership from Ottawa. We are in a third wave with dangerous variants, with rapid community spread, without sufficient vaccine supplies. The dangerous variants are because the border was never fixed by Mr. Trudeau after promises a year ago. The lack of vaccine capacity meant that community spread in the third wave was a big risk. We're already hearing some reports of a fourth wave because of the Trudeau failure on vaccines. The premiers are the ones forced to clean up the mess. And I know there's a challenge when there's restrictions and lockdowns with businesses and life being restricted. But I think Premier Kenney, like other premiers, have been trying to balance that while they've been waiting months for vaccines. So I would like to see Mr. Trudeau show some leadership, accelerate, let's save summer with 2 doses, not tell people to wait till Thanksgiving.
We will take the remaining question from the phone. Nous allons prendre les questions restantes au téléphone. Opérateur, prochaine question, the return question.
Réfilion, TVA.
Merci. Bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais revenir sur le rapport du commissaire à l'éthique pour avoir votre réaction. Est-ce que politiquement, le fait que M. Trudeau ne soit pas coupable, est-ce que ça clôt le dossier?
Absolument non, parce qu'on doit corriger la situation avec les scandales, plusieurs scandales d'éthique de M. Trudeau. C'est pourquoi on a besoin d'une loi anticorruption. C'est dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada après la pandémie. On doit avoir plus de transparence pour les décisions par le gouvernement, particulièrement en plein d'une pandémie. C'était inacceptable d'avoir une approche pour les amis proches de M. Trudeau et M. Monod. Et en même temps, les Canadiens sont en crise avec les PME, par exemple. Donc, c'est pourquoi on va avoir une loi anticorruption et je vais être un premier ministre éthique et ciblé sur le bien-être des Canadiens.
Je voulais aussi avoir votre commentaire au sujet du plan qui a été présenté ce matin par le gouvernement Legault, un projet de réforme de la loi 101. Le gouvernement Legault propose notamment d'inscrire dans la Constitution que le français est la seule langue officielle et commune au Québec. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec cette demande qui interpelle le fédéral? En d'autres mots, si vous devenez premier ministre, seriez-vous prêt à mettre ça en œuvre?
Je vais être un partenaire pour le Québec, pour le Premier ministre Legault. Comme vous le savez, Raymond, on a eu une réunion en septembre et on a parlé sur l'importance de la langue française. J'appuie la loi 101 pour les entreprises à charte fédérale. J'ai dit ça en septembre parce qu'on doit protéger le français. Et le français est la langue de travail au Québec. Et le gouvernement à Ottawa, on doit travailler en étroite collaboration avec le Québec pour la culture, la langue et l'identité québécoise.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada.
Merci beaucoup de prendre nos questions. J'aimerais continuer justement là-dessus. Je ne suis pas sûr que vous avez répondu directement à la question de mon collègue. Est-ce que vous iriez de l'avant avec ce que propose le Québec présentement avec son projet de loi 96 ou est-ce qu'au contraire, vous trouvez que ça va trop loin?
On doit protéger le français au Québec. Il y a un déclin à Montréal. On a eu un débat en l'automne sur ça. Je vais travailler en étroite collaboration sur la loi 101 pour les entreprises à charte fédérale et je vais toujours respecter les chambres des compétences des provinces. Comme vous le savez, en 2006, l'ancien gouvernement conservateur a reconnu la nation québécoise et c'est important d'avoir les politiques pour protéger la langue, la culture et l'identité québécoise. C'était un projet de loi pour ça par l'Assemblée nationale et le fédéral doit travailler avec l'Assemblée nationale pour protéger ça. C'est une force pour notre pays, c'est une part de l'identité canadienne.
je note que vous ne répondez pas directement à la question. Je dois quand même vous poser une question aussi sur le commissaire à l'éthique. Dans le passé, vous avez, d'une certaine façon, le premier ministre a été blâmé 2 fois. Et à ce moment-là, vous respectiez les recommandations et les décisions du commissaire Dion. Aujourd'hui, le commissaire Dion dit « M. Trudeau n'est pas en conflit d'intérêt ». Pourquoi est-ce que vous ne respectez pas cette décision-là?
Je respecte le commissaire et je vais examiner le rapport, mais comme vous avez dit, Christian, M. Trudeau a été blâmé 2 fois avant sur des autres scandales d'éthique. C'est le 3e rapport sur le Premier ministre. C'est inacceptable. Le Premier ministre doit être un leader, un exemple pour nos enfants. Et c'est pourquoi j'ai proposé une politique sur une loi anticorruption. On a besoin d'un gouvernement plus ouvert et plus transparent.
Opérateur, prochaine question. Operator, next question.
Bill Curry, Globe and Mail.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. I'd like to ask you about how your party's position has changed on C-10, because in second reading debates, your heritage critic, Alain Reyes, was asked at one point whether YouTube and Facebook should be regulated and come under this act, and he said the answer is yes. But there's nothing in this that would regulate social media or platforms like YouTube, and he was saying that as if it was a bad thing. Now the party's position has changed, so how do you explain that?
The government removing an exemption for people's social media accounts bill. When they pulled out Section 4.1, at the last moment, without any consultation of the other parties, after having suggested that that was critical to protect freedom of expression. This is why we do not trust the government on C-10. This is why when we see the Minister Guilbeault change his own analysis of his bill by the day, sometimes by the hour, the trust is gone from Canadians with respect to this. They've already said they intend to look at people's social media accounts like a form of broadcast that needs to be regulated by bureaucrats in Ottawa. That is unacceptable. You can protect Canadian content from abuse from American web giants without undermining a critical right for Canadians.
What are your thoughts on, it seems like this bill is being viewed very differently in Quebec versus the rest of Canada. In Quebec, it seems like, at least from the public commentary, there's more support for it, and perhaps that's reflected in your caucus as well. So your thoughts on how this is viewed in Quebec versus the rest of Canada?
As I said in my remarks, Bill, all Canadians are proud of our cultural industries, of our art, our culture, our musicians, our creative citizens, en français et en anglais. We need to highlight that and make sure that there's a level playing field. I've said that with respect to the streaming giants for well over a year now. So we support that. But you can do that without undermining the freedom of Canadians to use and share their thoughts on social media. What Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Guilbeault are proposing would be a radical transformation on how Canadians interact with one another on the internet. Conservatives, we will always protect that freedom and that liberty of Canadians, and we will have an approach to balance the playing field with the American web giants. But I want to be clear, if Mr. Trudeau makes deals with the NDP, with the Bloc Québécois, to pass this flawed bill that the minister can't even explain, we will revoke it in government and make sure we get the balance.
Operator, last question. Opérateur, dernière question.
Catherine Lévesque, The Canadian Press.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. J'aimerais continuer dans cette même veine. Je me demandais qu'est-ce que vous dites aux élus de l'Assemblée nationale du Québec qui ont tous voté en faveur d'une motion pour C10. Ils disent là, qu'on en a besoin le plus rapidement possible pour aider la culture québécoise, qui est là, vraiment une petite minorité dans un océan de culture anglophone. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous leur dites et est-ce que le fait de vouloir abroger C10, ça va nuire au Québec?
C'est possible de protéger la culture, l'identité québécoise, mais en même temps protéger la liberté d'expression. C'est pourquoi je vais révoquer l'approche de M. Trudeau, M. Guilbeault, et avoir une approche plus claire sur la culture, mais en même temps avec respect pour les libertés des Canadiens. C'est possible et c'est pourquoi, il y a un an, j'ai proposé des politiques sur les abonnements numériques au Québec. C'est pourquoi j'appuie l'approche de l'Assemblée nationale en ce qui concerne la langue française. C'est important pour notre caucus. Nous sommes le parti fier de ça, les deux peuples fondateurs, la langue française et la culture française, mais en même temps, on doit protéger les droits des Canadiens.
Donc, juste pour clarifier, est-ce que si vous êtes au gouvernement, est-ce que vous allez proposer une nouvelle réforme sur la radiodiffusion qui plairait au Québec? J'essaie juste de comprendre. Et mon suivi, c'est toujours sur C10. Votre parti a demandé un énoncé au ministère de la Justice là, pour s'assurer que le projet de loi respecte la liberté d'expression, même en retirant l'article 4.1. Si le ministère de la Justice vous revient et dit que C10 est conforme à la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés, est-ce que vous allez continuer votre campagne pour abroger C10?
Comme j'ai dit dans mon discours, on va révoquer le projet de loi C10 parce que c'est injuste sur la liberté d'expression, mais on va introduire un projet de loi pour équilibrer le terrain entre les créateurs de contenu canadiens, québécois et les géants de web américains, GAFA. C'est possible d'avoir une approche comme ça, particulièrement la TPS pour les amendements numériques. C'est injuste d'avoir une approche pour les entreprises québécoises et une approche pour les entreprises américaines, par exemple. Mais c'est important. Le projet de loi est brisé de M. Trudeau et c'est pourquoi on doit avoir une approche plus claire et ciblée sur la liberté d'expression et la culture.
This is all the time we have. C'est tout le temps que nous avions. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.